Fritz was a very upbeat, positive, optimistic kind of person. In fact, he'd often say that I was too negative, and I would reply, "Fritz, I'm not negative, I'm just realistic," because he would set out to accomplish things that I thought could never be done, and he usually was successful in doing them.
When you ask about what motivated Fritz, I think that he was one of those people that was driven by both his head and his heart. He wanted things to work out in a business sense. He wanted it to be efficient and accountable, but he also felt the compassion for people that drove him to be one of the biggest advocates for transitional housing, Porchlight.
I will tell people is probably the best thing I ever did in my life was I asked Fritz and then Janice to be on our first official board when we were called Transitional Housing. And I was so happy when he said yes. I just knew we were going in the right direction.
Fritz understood back in the early, mid-1980s that shelters were really not the solutions to homelessness, but instead affordable, really low-cost housing, particularly for single individuals, was more of a solution, and began the saga of Porchlight, in a sense, then Transitional Housing Incorporated, by buying and remodeling apartments that would help homeless persons.
And so from the beginning, they took their turns at night to stay. In those days, we went from 8 o'clock at night to 8 o'clock in the morning till we became more sophisticated in our way of handling the volunteer time and serving the men. So it was just, that was something that was just part of their life from the very beginning also.
He always told me the best thing he ever did was to bring Diane Ballwig into the organization.
I met Fritz over 40 years ago. I remember that he talked to me about Porchlight and asked me if I would join the board. And he was very encouraging, almost like a second father, and told me that I should be the chairman of the board. So I followed him as chairman of the board when I was relatively young, and I think it was one of the first leadership roles that I had under Fritz's mentorship. And it was Fritz's go-get-'em attitude that really pushed me, and I would always smile and think, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And I loved that about him.
And I just knew that he had this, from his background, that he had the knowledge of how to get grants, how to work with state and federal and local governments to help provide funding. And the fact that he was someone who worked with people then in a very personal level and really cared for what he did and had the professional experience that we really needed. This is what it was, to have that combination was very important and got us started with the first house.
One night, Fritz came home from the board meeting and said they had been discussing housing and finding some house for homeless people. And he came home and said that they had found a property on Broome Street, and they were going to put a bid in on it. I said, "Oh, great." He said, "However, both of us have to sign on the mortgage." So I said, "Oh, okay, that's fine." And then we were, after the closing of the house, we were there painting, and he looked at me and said, "If this doesn't work out, I think we could move down here." And I thought, well, that might work fine for adult people, but we have 5 kids who are still riding tricycles and bicycles, and it's right next to the railroad track.
I'll never forget the instance when we launched perhaps what was one of my first major capital campaigns. We decided to launch that capital campaign in August of 2007. Well, if you recall, August of 2007, shortly thereafter, there was the Great Recession, which wiped out a lot of people's stock portfolios and assets and everything else. Fritz, ever the optimist, told me, "Well, I think we can do this, and you're going to be the only one out there asking for any major donations." But that was just the type of person he was. He was always, very, very optimistic and really committed to growing the organization and developing the organization to be all that it could be.
When I think of Fritz, he saw the bigger picture and realized that there are a lot of people that have life a lot worse off than we do.
My personal hope is that they'll remember him for the tremendous gifts that he gave to put Porchlight on the map. Without him, Porchlight would be a quarter or less of what it is today and have much less in terms of potential for the future.
Fritz helped a lot of people in many, many ways, and that would be a lesson for all of us to learn from him.
Overall, Fritz's use of his time, talents, and gifts made the lives of the homeless, the lives of the staff and volunteers of Porchlight, and the members of this community all the richer.